for example, the Orioles, whose attendance is not necessarily very good. Yeah, how much does losing, suck out the life for the Orioles? But then you could say, well, just a second, the Tampa Bay Rays 2 years ago went to the World Series. They've been a pretty good team for the last 2 seasons, and their attendance still stinks. So what matters there? Okay? Does it matter that, for example, a team has a history? Do fans actually come to Oriole Park because the Orioles at one point, before your lifetimes, were winners? Actually, there was a very brief period in your lifetime where the Orioles were winners. But most of the time for your lifetime, they've been losers. But when I was born, they were winners. So, what determines that? How much does prior success? How much does current success? How much does having stars on your team matter? Or how new your stadium is? Oh, yeah. We won't get into the trouble of the Orioles. We could write a dissertation about that. I feel sorry for my wife. She's a big Orioles fan, and it's been rough that my team that has historically sucked actually has gone to the World Series more than hers lately. So you could do that. So anything with the internet is perfectly fine. Again, you want to think about where you're getting the data from. So you can do things on countries. So you could do something about what determines the literacy rate in a country. Okay. Well, what you'd want to do is think about things that might help determine the literacy rate, about education, income, things of that nature. And then you can go out, collect that data. Yeah, you can do different things on states. I've had a year or two ago a group do a study on what was the difference in suicide rates between states. Not necessarily a cherry subject, but they thought about, for example, do states that are northern, especially states like Minnesota and Wisconsin and places like that, have a higher suicide rate because people talk about seasonal affective disorder, and that during the winter, if it's dark and dreary outside, people get more depressed. So you could actually research, is that out there? Okay, or along those lines, maybe what's the alcoholism rate per state? And try to determine what determines that. Okay, is it income? Is it maybe somebody would say, well, if we have higher alcohol taxes, we cut down on the amount of alcoholics in a state. Actually, here in Maryland, they're talking about raising the alcohol taxes to fund treatment. Well, is there a link there? Or probably there isn't, is my guess. But you could actually see if there is. So you can do anything in terms of anything on state data. You could do county data. I've had students in the past do studies of what's the different crime rates between the different counties in Maryland and the city of Baltimore, where they've thought about what socioeconomic factors go into a crime rate. That's perfectly fine. So what your options are, choices there, are really whatever you want to dream of, to be honest with you. So what you're going to do is you're going to get this data. So the first thing that you need to do is basically form your question and think about what types of information do I need to get. Okay. And then once you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to tell me a story about that data. So if, for example, you do baseball teams winning, what you want to do is collect that data, and then you're going to use that data to tell me a story. So maybe you do tell me the story of, why do the Baltimore Orioles not perform well? Okay. And maybe part of that will be able to tell me, do they need to improve their pitching, or do they need to improve their hitting? Which one's more important towards winning? Okay. So you could go out and collect that. Maybe if you're trying to look at, maybe you're going to try to predict maybe the rate of depression between states. So you go out, you try to find the rates of depression. So what you would want to be thinking about is getting data about maybe income, unemployment rates, maybe the percentage of people that are married, what's the divorce rate in a state, things of that nature. Maybe how many sunny days a year do they have in that state? Okay. And then you could tell me a story about, for example, during these current economic woes, as unemployment has risen, what does that mean for the number of people or the percentage of people in a state that are depressed? Okay? So if a state sees a 1% increase in the unemployment rate, does that mean that maybe 2% more of their population is going to be experiencing symptoms of depression? Okay. I mean, I don't know what that number is, but you tell me that story. So what you're going to do is compile that data and then go through the techniques we're going to talk about in class. So you'll use descriptive statistics, which we'll talk about, in my next tape lecture probably. But we'll talk about that. We'll then go into hypothesis testing. So maybe you want to see, is there a difference between northern and southern states? Okay. Or is there a difference between males and females and how well they do in college? And then what you'll do is you'll do regression, which we'll talk about last, where you try to find out what are the effects of each of these individual variables on whatever you're trying to predict. So that's what you're going to be doing. Any questions so far? Everyone feeling at least decent about what we're trying to do? So really the key is coming up with a good question. Now what we're going to do, and I'll probably be posting this online, is sometime after spring break. So probably the class when we get back from spring break. What I'm going to do is let you form your groups, because that's going to be the important part. Then probably a week after you form your groups, what I'm going to ask you to do is write a brief proposal for me. This is not something that I'll grade, but I do want to get an idea of what do you want to study. Okay. So what you'd want to do is you might want to say to me, I'm interested in studying maybe I'm interested in studying something like the literacy rate in a state, or the childhood literacy rate in a state. Okay. So I want to study that. Okay. And what I think affects childhood literacy rate is information about income, information about what is the average educational level in the state for parents, for adults. In a state where more people are educated, it's more likely their children are also educated. Maybe something about how many libraries do they have in the state, or how much do they spend on libraries? How much do they spend on education per capita? Okay. And then what you'd also want to tell me is where do you get that data from? Okay. So where are you hoping to get that data from? As I said, some of them are pretty straightforward. If you're going to say I'm doing baseball teams winning, you'd want to list out the factors that you're going to look for and where you're going to get the data from. That one is pretty understandable. The student survey one, what you do is you'd want to say to me, I want to study maybe how many drinks a student has per week. Okay. And then what you'd say is, I think these things affect how often students go out drinking. So, whatever questions that you think that would come up. And what I'd want you to include there is a copy of a survey that you'd ask. Okay. That way I can see what questions you're going to ask, and so I can also help you go, okay, this is maybe a good question, maybe you need to think about this question. This question may be confusing, so you might want to reword it. Things of that nature, so I have an idea of where your questions are, because I'd rather you change your question early on than you go out, collect data, and then go, oh, cripes, that doesn't help me. So I'd rather nip it in the bud before we start. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. So as I said, after the break, when we get back, we'll have one day for you to form groups for 10, 15 minutes, let you talk.